All right, so hopefully you guys are seeing the SBA's website. Okay, great. I wanted to make sure that everybody, first of all, knows how to get to our COVID relief 19 options. So you just go to the website, go into our COVID relief options, and as you can see over here, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund has its own little icon, and that will take you to the landing page for the website itself. Hopefully, both of you have registered in the portal for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. That's this button here. If you haven't, not a big deal. The registration piece, what you're doing is providing an email address. There's a two-factor authentication, so you do have to have cell phone. They'll send you a text message to verify, and then you can get on your way. You'll be registered to be able to go through the application process. A couple of things that I want to show on this page that are going to be very, very helpful to you as you go through the application process. First of all, is there's a program guide up here. It's a PDF document, and it's pretty easy to use. You enter if you've got search terms, if you're an LLC and you want to see if there are any questions or comments about LLCs, just put that in the search terms and it'll come up and take you to all those options. I personally like the knowledge base even better because this is really our FAQs. It's changing daily, it's changing hourly. As questions come in and we can answer them, they get added to this knowledge base. This is going to be where Sarah and I, as we're assisting small business owners, we are getting a lot of our information from here as well. So this is really a good place to be. Once we get into the portal screenshots, I'll explain that actually once you're in the portal, it links back to the knowledge base with some of the help questions. Couple of other things that I think are important. This is the sample application, and obviously you're going to be applying online. Hopefully nobody has to apply via phone because then you have to send everything in through the mail. You'll be applying online, but the sample application lets you see what the calculations look like. So there are 3 different ways to calculate how much grant funding you're eligible for. And we'll go into a little more detail on that when we get to the portal screen. But this is a way for you to actually see it and create yourself a draft application. Other couple of things on here, if you have time, this first webinar is just a brief overview of the Restaurant Revitalization Fund program. This webinar here it walks you through what the portal looks like, using some screenshots as well. They're doing it in real time, so it's a little bit easier. You can see what's in some of the drop-down boxes. Unfortunately, I'm going to be using screenshots. I don't have quite that much ability to get in there. So this page is really important for you to know about as you're going through the process. So I'm going to go into these portal screenshots and just walk you through. I'll talk through the overview of the program, and Sarah's going to jump in. She's been doing a few more of these. If I miss any fine details, she's going to jump in. But this is the first page of the application, and this speaks to the eligibility of the businesses. So this program is geared at businesses whose primary function is to serve food and beverage to the public. So what that means is that state and local governments aren't going to be eligible. Nonprofits aren't eligible. This program is really geared at for-profit businesses. You also cannot have a pending application in the Shuttered Venue Operator Grant Program. And I think the other big thing here is just to know that you do need to be able to answer no to all of these questions. This need help button down in the corner goes back to the knowledge base. So some of those knowledge-based questions that I mentioned on that first screen, you can also access that through this need help down in the corner. But this screen speaks to those businesses that aren't eligible. So restaurants, bars, wineries, breweries, I know we have a distillery online, tap rooms, all are potentially eligible. in the case of some of those groups like breweries, wineries, and distilleries, you do need to be able to show that 33% of your sales were to the public, and those could be, they need to be on site. So there's an understanding that with the pandemic, a lot of breweries, a lot of distilleries were doing a lot of more off sale than maybe you planned on. So you do need to be able to show that 33% was for on-site sales. So for instance, in the case of a brewery, you maybe had crowler sales going out the door. But you know, are you able to show that 33% were done in-house? Some of the business details. So there is priority in this program. Women, veterans, and socially and economically disadvantaged individuals are going to be in the first priority group. So when the applications come in, as I said before, and I guess I don't recall if I actually did say this before, but SBA is encouraging everybody, whether you're in the priority group or not, to start applying right away. As Jonathan mentioned, there's $28.6 billion for the program. The issue that we're going to have is that's probably not enough money to cover everybody. So if SBA has the data, if they have all of these applications in already, and they have the data that Congress needs to decide whether they should provide more funding to the program, this is what they need. They need to know what is the need. And by putting an application in, that's going to let people know what the need is. So those three priority groups are going to be first. Sarah, I don't know if you want to speak. You've been talking a little bit more. The socially and economically disadvantaged groups, can you name them off the top of your head?
Yeah, absolutely. So some individuals are automatically assumed to be in that priority group because they're socially and economically disadvantaged. As just a quick shortcut, anybody who self-identifies as being BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, or person of color, whether you're Black, Hispanic, Native American, Asian American, or Pacific Islander, if you identify as any of those groups, we're going to automatically consider you to be socially and economically disadvantaged. And again, that means that if you apply during the first 20 days of the application period, well, anybody can apply during that time, and we encourage everybody to. Your applications are going to be funded before folks who do not fall into those priority groups. And then folks can also be a socially or economically disadvantaged group that doesn't identify as BIPOC. They just need to be able to certify. So basically kind of hold up your hand and say, yes, this applies to me, self-certify that they have experienced barriers due to having either economic tools not available to them, or who've experienced barriers not based on themselves as an individual, but because of their participation in a larger group or identification in a larger group that would pose barriers to their business being successful. So again, we don't need to have documentation of that. We just need folks to self-certify in the application.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So the next thing it asks about is franchises. If you are a franchise, you just need to, you would select yes, this box, and you see this grayed out box. If you select yes in this box will then open up and allow you to start typing your franchise name. And I guess that's one thing I want to point out. So I personally use H&R Block to do my taxes. This system operates much in the same way that H&R Block, the TurboTax, those tax softwares. What you put in this box, if you answer no in this box is going to stay grayed out and you're not going to be able to type in it. So the answers that you put in one place have the effect of making other fields, open or not open. So you want to be careful about what you're putting in. Next question on bankruptcy. If you filed for bankruptcy, some companies are still eligible to apply for the program. If you file if you're in the middle of a chapter 11, 12, or 13, and you have a functioning reorganization plan, in other words, you're paying to the trustee and the trustee is in turn then paying to the creditors, you would potentially be eligible to apply. And then the question that you can't write here is the restaurant type, and that's where it's going to be asking, are you a restaurant, a brewery, a distillery, You know, what type of restaurant are you? And that's where we'll get into the detail then of, you know, whether or not you need to have that 33% of sales be on site. So this screen here goes into some of the demographic details of the business. So when you enter the business type in here, it's going to then come up and ask you a series of questions. So depending on what you answer here, it's going to ask you for an EIN, a social security number, or an ITIN. If your business type, if you're a sole proprietor, it's probably not going to let you enter an EIN number in here. So you have to be paying attention to what your taxing situation is. So, you know, if you're paying taxes based on your social security number, then you're probably a sole proprietor. So what you put in this box is going to affect what you put in this box. And the same is in some of the other boxes as well. So there's a business legal name, your DBA name. How are you registered with the Secretary of State's office? If you have to be able to list the owners of the business up to at least 20%. So if you're the 100% owner of the business, that's no problem. You're the owner of the business, your name's going to go in there. If you've got, let's say you've got 10, to make this easy on myself, let's say you've got 10 owners and they each have 10%. You're going to have to list at least enough owners to reach that 20% threshold. And you want to make sure that whoever is has the ability to sign the documents at the end. And when we get to that last screen, we'll talk a little bit about why that's important.
I have a question, Twyla, if that's
Sure.
Okay. So when you said when that business type is going to drive, you know, how a heavy portion of that application goes. So if your first year, you didn't have W-2 employees, so technically you're kind of forced to fall into that sole proprietor when you're using when you're filing your taxes. But what if now that it's 2021, we do have employees, so now we switch over from just a sole proprietor because the taxes are going to be filed differently. Do you just go based on the year that you're planning to use if you're using 2019, or how it's the best way to do that?
So when we get back to the taxes, there is a way to explain that. So I think what you want to do here is put in, what are you now? What are you looking at now at this point in time? And then when we get back to the screens where it talks about uploading your taxes, you can put a cover page on your tax information that you upload and explain sort of, you know, what's happened. That way, what's going to happen with this application, when you're done with it, there are SBA staff people that are going to be reviewing and recommending and approving. So there's a reviewer group, a recommender group, and an approver group. And you want to make it as easy as possible for the reviewers and the recommenders to understand. So in that particular case where you've had some changes, you can put a timeline on there and just say, you know, in 2019, I opened my business. This is what I had. You know, in 2020, you know, December of 2020, we started hiring employees. And so if you can provide a certain amount of detail to make it understandable about what's going on with your business. Does that make sense?
Definitely. Copy.
Okay. And Sarah, does that make sense with what you've been seeing? Okay. So this is, again, mostly demographic information here.
But okay, well, I guess, wait, I'm sorry. So
okay.
You said, so therefore you start out the application in the status of where you are now. Is that also if your 2020 taxes have not been filed yet as well?
So if your 2020 taxes haven't been filed, and we'll get back, when we get back to the tax piece, we'll go into a little detail about what's allowable for documentation. So because you haven't filed your 2020 taxes, you're going to be using something a little bit different. But again, there's going to be that same opportunity because you know, 2019, you're going to have to file some documentation to show your income and expenses. You know, 2020, same thing. And depending on what calculation you're using, it might even be that instead of applying on gross receipts, you're going to be applying based on your expenses because you haven't opened yet. So there's some intricacies there that we can go into on. Before I go into a whole ton of detail on affiliates, does anybody here have affiliates? Because if not, we're not going to go too deep in the weeds, because we could go really deep in the weeds with affiliation. Just so that if you have more than 20 affiliates, whether or not those affiliates are all restaurants. So if you have 15 dry cleaners and 10 restaurants, that means you have 20, and they're all affiliated, 25 affiliated businesses, you actually are not eligible for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, even though you only have 10 restaurants. So affiliation does come into play. So there are some rules here around affiliation. And
can you explain what you mean by affiliation in this?
Yeah, well, basically affiliated businesses are, who has control and who has control and who benefits from these businesses. So for instance, if you have 3 or 4 different businesses and you're the owner of the businesses and you're the beneficiary of the revenues of the businesses, they would be affiliated.
So I believe I might in that situation.
Okay, so what I would say is just pay attention as you're going through here, just pay attention to this question. It says, so for instance, the first question, you must select yes if your eligible applicant entity has an equity interest or a right to profit from distributions of 50% or more of one or more other business entities. So if that's the case, then you would say yes in that space.
Okay. I'll talk to someone, between you or Sarah individually more in depth about it to figure out the best way.
Yep, sounds good. Sounds good. It's the affiliation rule can get a little bit tricky.
Of course. Okay.
So with the award, the next screen is going to be the award calculation. So they're asking you, what do you anticipate using the funds for? And what they're talking about is from the award date forward. So from now until March 11th of 2023, which is the deadline for which the funds need to be spent. How are you going to spend it? Payroll, rent, and mortgage. One thing on the use of funds, so you can't use them to expand your business. So let's say that the next storefront over is open and you're thinking that you'd like to buy that and expand your business over that direction. You can't use the restaurant revitalization funds for that purpose. But let's say that the city of St. Paul is going to allow you to use some back alley space that you have for outdoor seating to, add a little bit to your business. You can use the funds for outdoor seating, but you can't use it to expand your indoor space. You can use it to, purchase food and beverage, operating expenses. This is really about, and this isn't an award to replace any profits that you might been missing out on. This is really, what do you need for working capital? What are you looking at to need to keep your business moving forward?
Which that's great. That's great. We need it for that.
Exactly.
And I got a question. If I
Sure, Jonathan.
And I think you might have already answered it, but the scenario, with social distancing, you can't fit as many tables in your restaurant as you may have been able to before. Would that still be looked at if you were trying to maybe, let's say like you're in a Skyway and you wanted to have more seating because you're social distanced? Is that still considered expanding your space?
So are you talking adding space, getting like another storefront in the Skyway? Or are you talking about putting like tables out into the Skyway area?
I'm talking about getting like another stall, like in the Skyway,
Yeah, so that would,
for the lack of tables that you can.
Yeah, that would probably be considered an expansion.
Okay.
Aren't we as businesses able to, regardless, because we need help, just maneuver our funds to, kind of in the sense, make sure that it appears this way anyway, with documentation?
Well, so what you would be looking at is, okay, so let's say you get the funding and you can use this funding for payroll.
Right.
Okay, so, and then you could use other funding that you have coming in for that expansion piece.
As where you would have used it for payroll before.
Exactly. The idea here is that these funds, and there are going to be some requirements for record keeping and reporting. So you want to keep records showing that you used the funds for the specific allowed expenses. So you don't want to have, if you're trying to account for the funding, you don't want to be accounting for the funding, using it to, to do something that you're, like expanding your business over to a new space. But again, using this one for payroll, as you can see, there's quite a list of working capital expenses. So if that frees up some of your other funds for that expansion, that's okay. But these funds need to be used for these purposes. If you've got any PPP funds, you do have to account for those. And what I will tell you is on this screen here, where it asks for that information, when you put your PPP loan number in, it is most likely going to pre-populate your loan amount in here. And the amount that goes in here is the full loan amount. It's not the amount of the loan that may not get forgiven. It's going to be the entire loan amount. And the reason that's going to go in there is that amount actually gets deducted from what you would be eligible to receive, because it's considered a grant program as well.
I have two questions to that.
Okay.
One question is, what if your first PPP has been confirmed with documentation forgiven already? Do you still put that amount in there?
Yes, it'll automatically populate with that, because it's going to, and I'm glad to hear that you've got PPP and we're able to get it forgiven. And at that point, it's considered basically in the nature of a grant. Yeah. Hence, it gets deducted.
So then the second one is, what if you're in application for your round 2, but it hasn't made it to the SBA yet?
So Sarah, you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question. So basically, you can't be in the middle of an application for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund and an uncompleted application for PPP at the same time. So if you're in the middle of a second round application, you're going to have a choice. You can choose to go ahead and finish your PPP second draw application and go ahead and try to get that one. Or you can go ahead and try to get RRF. The caveat here is, let's say that RRF funds last longer than we anticipate. Maybe we're a couple weeks out, there's still money in this pool of $28.6 billion for RRF. If by that point you got your second draw PPP approved and you had it dispersed to your bank account and you were already starting to use PPP for the business, and you saw, well, hey, it looks like there's still funds available in RRF, I think I want to go apply for that, you could still do that. We just can't have you basically be in the middle of an incomplete PPP application. So if you decide you do want to apply for RRF, the moment you submit your application, you'll just need to contact your PPP lender and withdraw that pending, it sounds like second draw application in your circumstance.
Copy. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. So this page here speaks to the calculation. So with 2019, if you're using table 1, this is for applicants who have been in business since prior to the start of 21. So, January of 2019. So you're going to put in 2019 gross receipts, you're going to do 2020 gross receipts, and you're going to put in the number of locations that you have. This is one of those areas where it's possible that if you still, and it's really difficult because of course this is a screenshot. So this is the screenshot for if you choose the table 1 calculations. If you choose table 2, it might ask you some slightly different questions. It's going to ask you what your 2019, it's going to ask you what those gross receipts were, probably how many months you had those gross receipts, And then it's going to extrapolate, but from that information, it's going to extrapolate what your annualized 2019 would have been based on those partial months. Table 3 calculation is going to come up for those people that were either, let's say you opened in November of 2019, so you were only open a month or so, or you didn't get open until 2020. And so you didn't really have any 2019 gross receipts. So what you can do is apply based on the expenses that went into starting your business. And again, you're going to get a different set of boxes. My best advice for this is to pull up the sample application, because there's a table in there. If you can, print out the page, and you can actually do the math in there and have that ready as you're filling out this information here. And it will give you a better visual of what SBA is looking at for the calculations. But at the end of the day, what you're going to get here is what your calculated award amount is. So there's a couple of maximums and a couple of minimums. What I will say is, and I've had this unfortunate conversation with a few people who told me that their 2020 gross receipts were actually better than their 2019 gross receipts. In that particular case, you're probably not going to be eligible for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund to get a grant, because the idea here is that we are helping with helping those businesses where their gross receipts in 2020, which is, the pandemic year, the expectation is those gross receipts were less than 2019. So if by chance your 2020 gross receipts were higher than 2019, you're probably not going to be eligible for a grant. There is a minimum award amount. So if you get to this particular point here, this calculated award amount, and it's less than $1,000, you're not going to be eligible for an award, because $1,000 is the minimum. And if you get here and the calculated award amount is $6 million, you are limited to $5 million per location, up to $10 million for affiliated businesses. So if you have 4 affiliated businesses and each one is eligible for $5 million, you are going to be capped at $10 million for all of your affiliates. And again, we can have a conversation. We could go into a little bit more detail on the calculations, but I really think looking at the sample provides a really good visual. It gives you a very good idea of what SBA specifically is looking for. Sarah, is there anything that you'd like to add there?
Can I talk for a moment about if anyone has a business that opened partially through the pandemic? So in the event that you are a business that had the just really terrible timing of the really bad luck of trying to get started during COVID-19. So basically, between January 1st of 2020 and March 11th, 2021, if that was a time when you started your restaurant, started your food truck, started your bar or brewery, started your distillery, trying to get things going, and you don't yet have any gross receipts, you haven't even made your first sale yet, you can still potentially get RRF. And in those circumstances, the thing that we would do for you is we would look at all of the eligible expenses, the things that RRF would be able to be used for, all the eligible expenses that you've already spent to date during that period on trying to get the business started. And then we would subtract any sales that you have done to date. So any gross revenue that you have done for 2020 or 2021, and then subtract off any PPP that you might have received. So in that case, just remember when we get to talking about documentation, I'm sure Twyla will talk more about the things you can submit in those places, but I just want to draw folks' attention to the fact that unlike many of our other COVID-19 relief resources, this is one of the few ones where you can basically be a startup in the restaurant, food beverage service space and be pre-revenue, but potentially qualify.
Good point, Sarah. And if you are somebody that started partially through 2019, it might be of interest to you to look at both the Table 2 and the Table 3 calculations, because basically you can do both calculations and then choose whichever option gets you to a higher level of award amount.
In regards to expenses, how do we submit that as documentation if someone has had no revenue but only expenses?
Yep. So when we get back to the screen here, I'll cover that. We'll cover that briefly and let you know what it is that they're going to be looking for. It's going to be pretty similar to the expenses that you can spend the grant on. So the depository account. So once you get the funding, once the funding's approved, it's going to go directly to your bank account. There are two ways to handle getting this information to SBA. So first of all, SBA is working with Plaid to do an automatic kind of, entry to your account. So let's see. Oh, they don't put that screen there. Okay. So with Plaid, so what you do is if you hit this continue button, it's going to ask some information and it's going to ask for your login information. It's going to ask, let's say you have a Wells Fargo account. It's going to ask for your login name and your password. And then SBA is going to look at that. The way it's part of our fraud review. So we need to make sure that we need to ensure that you have an existing business account, that we're working with an actual business. Unfortunately, the thing that we've discovered in the last 14 months is there was a whole lot of fraud happening in some of our programs. So this is a way to mitigate that. It also is going to mitigate human error entry into, putting your bank account and routing information is, because basically it's like your taxes. You provide your bank account, you provide your routing account to TurboTax, and then when your tax refund comes in, it's auto deposited into that account. This is the similar setup. So Plaid is the way that SBA can do an auto verification, but you do have to provide your login and password with your lender. Alternatively, you can do a manual entry of your bank name, your account number, your routing information, and then of course, whatever accounting type that you have. When it comes in this direction, what you're going to see is that it will tell you that it may slow things up a bit. And we have seen some entries, some error entries, for instance, with the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program that did slow down us being able to get funds into depository accounts. So if you choose this option, just be very, very careful that you quadruple check everything that you're providing to make sure that we have the right information. So this is the supporting documentation. So based on all of the answers in your other questions, it's going to come back and say, okay, this is what we expect to see for documentation. So if you selected table 1, you're going to see that we're looking for your 2019 tax returns. We're going to be looking for your one of these. So the preferred method would be your 2020 taxes or your point of sale reports. And one thing I didn't mention, I didn't go into a lot of detail, is that you do have the option of applying through Square and Toast as vendors. You can also contact, I'm drawing a blank on your point of sale. So let's say you don't go that way, but you've got a point of sale vendor that you can get your reports from. We can use those to show what your 2020 information was. Or you can do an externally or internally prepared financial statement. The only thing with that is if you're not using the point of sale reports or your income tax returns, that does require a little more review by SBA. So if you are using, we're also going to ask for bank statements, and I have to apologize, I forgot. They selected, as I scrolled to the next screen, I realized, why am I not seeing the rest of the calculation? And it's because going back to the fact that we selected calculation 1 4 screens ago, this is what we get for supporting documentation. So if you select calculation 3, let's say, it's going to give you other things. It could be, so let's say that you have these expenses. It might be that you have some, it might be that you have receipts. Let's say that you have receipts from suppliers. You know, you have some vendor sale documents. You know, those are, you know, whatever documentation you have showing that you have these expenses that you incurred, that's what you would provide. And this is, again, you're going to be uploading these. You can upload a cover sheet. So if you've got this great big list of expenses and you feel that there might be some questions about that, or you think that there's some things you need to clarify, feel free to take an opportunity to provide that clarifying information so that the person who's reviewing and recommending on your application has what they need. We want them to get to yes, and we want them to get to yes quickly. So you're also going to be asked for 3 months of bank statements if you haven't previously provided them. And I believe all of the calculations are asked for the same thing. The 3 months of bank statements, again, goes back to that fraud mitigation. It's going to show that you didn't just open your account. One of the things that happened with EIDL is that people would go in, open an account, they applied for EIDL, money got deposited, the account was closed. So we want to know that we have valid business accounts. And so that's where the 3 months of bank statements come in. So this information here goes back again to probably the second or third screen where we entered information, and it's asking for the authorized owner of the applicant. So one of the authorized owners who has authorization to sign needs to be filling this information out, because you're going to put this information in, and then that authorized owner is going to be verified based on some information. So I don't know if you guys have ever applied for something online and they'll come back to you and say, you know, what was your mother's maiden name? And you're like, well, how did they know that? Well, it's because the bank has you know, they've got these security questions that they ask you. So some of that information is going to come back, or it might say, did you live at this address in, you know, I'll date myself, 1985. And it's like, oh yeah, you know, that I did, so I could verify that that is me. So if you have, you could have an accountant or somebody that can help you fill this out, but the authorized owner is going to need to be there when we get to this point, because there are going to be several very personal questions that get asked that potentially only that authorized owner is going to know the answer. Sarah, any thoughts? Anything I've missed so far at this point?
So one thing that I popped in the chat, but I'll say it just for ultra clarity, is there's a wording thing throughout the restaurant revitalization program that's a little funny, and I just want to draw folks' attention to it. Anytime we say the applicant, we don't mean you as the business owner, we mean your business entity. So anytime during the application, anytime as we're, you know, discussing things, if we say the applicant, we don't mean, you know, you Nathan, you Tamara, you Eric. We mean the name of your company or the parent company that owns your company if you have multiple affiliates or holdings. So when we say authorized owner of the applicant, again, it's that referring to the business, not to you.
Thank you. One of the things that we've discovered, words matter. So the words do definitely matter. And again, if you get hung up, if you have a question, feel free to just click on this need help in the bottom, and it's going to come up with, and what it's going to do is going to come up with some of the suggested Q&A pieces that might be applicable in your particular case. And if not, you'll have an opportunity to search for using a search term. So you continue on, you know, filling out the information. You're going to get to the bottom. It's going to give you an estimated award amount. So this is the estimated amount based on the information that you've provided in this application. Now, keep in mind that once you hit that sign and submit application, it goes to a reviewer, it goes to a recommender, and it's going to go to an approver. So that estimated amount is the amount that SBA, based on what you have right here, it plans to provide to you. Now, once it goes to that reviewer, there might be some questions that need to be answered, and that could affect the award amount up or down. You know, if there are any eligibility questions, if there's something in the application that potentially makes you ineligible once the reviewer looks at it, you know, there's all sorts of things that go into getting the funding directly back into your account. All things considered, we've been told that it takes somewhere between, I would say, 15 and 45 minutes. If you have all of the information, if you've done the application in advance on that paper application, and you've got all of your documents sitting on your desktop, and you can just upload things in, we've been told it can take as little as 20 minutes to get all the way through the process. If you have to do some hunting and pecking, if you have to go in and check some things, it might take a little bit longer. So that gets you to the point where the application is now being submitted to SBA. This is via the portal. And again, you have an option if you work with Square or Toast, they're actually accepting the applications as well using their point of sale software. And then once you get to this point, it gets offloaded to SBA. So the application piece itself, instead of going through the portal, would be going through the Square or Toast vendor software. The third way that you can do this, and it's not recommended, but with the understanding that there are areas of the country that don't have good broadband, that you need to talk to somebody on the phone. If you have to, you can submit the application online, over the phone. If you do that, though, everything has to be mailed in. So your documentation is all going to have to be mailed into SBA. Somebody is going to have to review it there, and they're going to be communicating back and forth with you. So it's, again, very, very slow process. So when you get to the summary page, so this summary says, thank you for submitting your application. And it gives you a confirmation number, and you can view your signed application. If you get to this point where you click the sign and submit application and you're missing any documentation, instead it's going to come up not too dissimilar from TurboTax, and it's going to say, we're missing this item, and it'll have a hyperlink back to the place in the application where where something needs to be either uploaded or answered. I think that's pretty much what I was going to cover, Sarah. Is there anything that you can think of? And we can open it up to questions from everybody as well.
Yeah, we can absolutely do questions. The only thing that I was going to mention, just looking at the time right now, is, the application portal begins for applications. It's going to open up and folks can start applying in 3 minutes. So if you have questions, we can absolutely answer them. But if you're in the place where you're like, I'm ready to rock and roll, I just want to go, now may be the time for you to switch modes and go on to sba.gov/restaurants, go into that portal and just get poised to click that button and get started the moment that you can. But of course, let's answer questions so that if